Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast. It is me, Mike Chalice, and on the other end, it is my man, Steve Hall. How's it going, Steve?
As we were talking off air, a little bit stressed,
Yeah.
feeling a little bit overwhelmed because for those watching, hopefully the visuals are of a higher quality. They should be because we're using Riverside to record this and not Zoom. So I'm just trying to get to grips with the new platform and get comfortable with it and maintain the high quality that we provide at Revive Stronger. So yeah, feeling a little bit overwhelmed with that and some other things that are just going on in life at the moment. But how are things on your end, Mike? How's everything going in the flat, the bare flat, which
The
you're going
bear
to be?
flat.
Are we allowed to say you're moving soon?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. So I can't. It's, sometimes when you're not sure who you've told people and you're not sure who you've kind of let people know, but I have bought a house. It's my first house that I've bought. So I'm still based in Whitney in Oxfordshire. But I've been renting most of my life and, but no, decided to buy a house. So I'm just out on the other side of Whitney and hopefully won't be too long before I'm moving, which is really, really exciting. And because I've always rented, and because I'm quite indifferent, should I say, to pictures and stuff. Like I'm quite comfortable. Like if nothing's on the wall, it doesn't bother me too much, and I can just get by. But I get it how it's this nice thing, and certainly if other people are kind of watching and stuff, it's nice to have decorations. But because I was always renting, I always thought, it's not mine, blah, 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 all these excuses. But now I've officially got a place, got no excuse not to customize it.
yeah, it's one of those. I was very similar and I know you have that kind of philosophy with lots of things in life, and it's one of those almost like ignorance is bliss in some way. But once you like, for me, I was the same, and I didn't have an office until we bought this house, and then having an office and having my own space, it's like, oh, I actually really enjoyed like kind of kitting it out, painting it, carpeting it, making it my own. And so I think you'll really actually appreciate that when you do move, and then yeah, even getting some like bits of artwork maybe, or whatever it
Definitely.
is, you can frame some of your favorite quotes or something.
Yeah, no, I have. I've been on Etsy.
Oh
I've been
yeah.
trying to start researching. I've been like, is there anything where it's like an anime plus a motivational quote or something like that? So I've been like, those are the sort. If you looked at my Google search, that's what would be coming up, like all sorts of anime and Naruto stuff.
So actually for you, Mike, it's been an interesting kind of week or so.
Yeah.
Last time we were speaking on here, we were talking about how well your cut had gone, and almost uh, couldn't say too well. You
Mm,
almost could say too well.
yeah.
Kind of not the right way to say it necessarily, but it had gone very well. And then fatigue really set in from when we chat on and like over the weekend, right? So yeah, what happened? Let the listeners know what happened, and then what you've been doing the last days and how that's going.
Yeah, I think hopefully this will be helpful for people because because we check in sort of on a Tuesday, and around kind of Wednesday I was like, I'm becoming aware of some diet fatigue symptoms. I'm noticing that I'm a bit more food focused, and also I'm a bit more reluctant to move around as much. Like if, say, like I want to stand up and, walk somewhere or, move an object or something, it's like, it's just a conscious effort for me to do it. Whereas, before you don't think twice about doing it. And so I started noticing those sorts of things. And then it got to kind of Friday and I was like, oh, this is getting a little bit more. And then on Saturday, I had quite a hard training session, and I was actually a bit of a so I was in the session and I was like, oh, I've had my normal meal before training, but I'm noticeably hungry in the training session, and the training session was hard, and I had to sort of, in order to get the performances that I needed to, I had to really dig to that next level. And even though kind of after those sort of training sessions, it's normal for me to be a bit fatigued anyway, it was well above the fatigue levels that were normal for me. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I've got a refeed coming. It's going to be all good. And I took the refeed on, I had a refeed on Sunday, and interestingly, I felt better. And I was like, oh, this is great. You know, the refeed's done its job. Everything's hunky dory. Woke up on Monday and I was like, feel good. All is well. And I got into the training session and I started off with a few smaller body parts and they went all fine. I was like, yep, this is great. And then I got into sort of my chest work and my compound movements. And all of a sudden, my performance just dropped. And I just couldn't I couldn't match the performance that I got the previous week. And I was like, oh, this is really unusual. And it was also frustrating as well. And then I thought, right, okay, you know, this has happened, but I'll give it another day and I'll see what happens. I won't just judge it based off of the moment. And then kind of, again, I felt a little bit fatigued on Monday maybe, but otherwise I was still feeling really good after the refeed. Tuesday came, did my Tuesday session, and immediately, like, all of my lifts were down. And again, I was like, do you know what? There's not even any point in me trying to force this, because I'm just going to layer fatigue on top of this. And we've definitely been in that position before where I've not been performing and I've just tried to persevere and dig even deeper to try and get some performance out. And actually, it's just made things worse. It's dug me into a deeper hole. So I stopped, I deloaded the pull session, and then kind of we caught up after that and we had our check-in. And so what the plan now has been is on Tuesday, we took that as a refeed day, and essentially I've had four refeed days. So this is my third refeed day. I'll have another one tomorrow. And I deloaded, so the pull session was deloaded. I deloaded my leg session, and today I performed well. So I actually matched I'm currently in week 6. So this would be week 6, I think. So I actually decided, so we matched performance from week 2, roughly speaking, and then probably do that moving forwards. And again, it's made a nice difference, actually. Again, I performed well in the gym today, and you know, matching the performance was actually very, very comfortable, which was great.
Good.
So again, like, it's amazing how, even though relatively speaking, you know, things were, for me, I was feeling a bit down. I was feeling down on Tuesday, but even after just 2 days, it's amazing how things have just turned around quite quickly. So yeah, so interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's very easy to beat yourself up about how you would like something to go and how you planned it to go. But if you did everything you should have done, then the body will just give you what it's got. I don't know what audiobook I was listening to, but he was talking about this in regards to sleep and just saying he used to stress about waking up in the night and being like, oh, my sleep score is going to be down. I'm not going to be well rested for the next day. This is real bad. And he kind of flipped on his head and was like, oh, my body doesn't need sleep right now. I can kind of read a book in a dark room and do that instead for a moment. And then maybe I'll need to go back to sleep because I'll feel sleepy again. But it was kind of just being like, hey, like if you hit failure sooner than you expected on a set, for example, you're that fatigued, or that's what your body had in that moment. If you gave your best shot, like it's similar to, you can't control what the judges think of your physique. You can only step on stage and bring your best, and you get what you get. So it's similar in your kind of situation. You did what you thought was your best effort, and you can't be sad at that. And as you mentioned, it was a good lesson. It was a good lesson for me, again, as your coach and being in your corner and kind of trying to recognize the sign and signals so we can avoid this sort of thing happening. But it's also one of those where it's like, maybe we can't avoid it always. Definitely can't always avoid it. Maybe we can never avoid it. It's then how do we rectify it? And so I'm interested, and I'm glad to hear so far what we did in terms of backing off, semi-deloading, and having some refeed days has helped us. And I wonder now, is it going to only help us really transiently and for a short term, or are we actually going to have got the boost we kind of wanted to keep dieting for another couple of weeks? So that'll be interesting to see. But there are always lessons, and there's always silver linings to these sort of things, right?
Oh, definitely. And I think if the key thing is recognizing the mistake and then acting on it in the future as well. And I really liked that, how you said to me about what you just said of, you've just got to accept what the body's giving you, and just almost just allow things to be what they will be, and then just move forwards. And we even talked about it in the last episode, where it's about just accepting what's happening without adding emotion to it, and then just moving forwards. And I think that's so important. And I think sometimes a lot of frustrations can be, particularly for me, it's like, could we have foreseen this more? Could I have done things differently? And another thing was about the thing that I really liked what you said was, fast progress has its costs. And I thought that was so true. And I also saw a quote today which said, a flame that burns twice as bright lasts twice as less, or something like that. And again, it hit me so much. And everything has its costs. And if progress is going really, really fast, well, they are going to be paying the price at some point, and it's probably going to happen a lot quicker than something else. So yeah, I thought that was just such a great piece of advice.
It comes back to one of my quotes that I always pump out there, is the for every gimme there's a gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
This also makes me think of, I know Mike Israel's spoken about it in terms of steroid use, where it kind of, you get extra now for the cost of less later, i.e. you kind of shave maybe 10 years off your life for more life now, or a super life, superhuman capabilities, but it's short-lived and there's costs involved. So yeah, it was interesting kind of having that framing. But and looking at I'm excited for, have you taken physique updates yet?
I'm going to take them on Saturday. After all the refeeds. So nice. I'm excited as well, because I was a bit flat in the progress pictures last weekend, so it'll be exciting to see what a bit of a fuller Mike looks like.
It makes a ton of difference when you're nicely lean, which you're pretty damn lean now, not like shredded by any means, but you're definitely considerably leaner than you were and now are. And yeah, it can make the leaner you are, the bigger difference it makes. So the fact you kind of took those progress photos when you were like your lightest, I think it's just like that's your flattest too. So yeah, I'll be excited to see how you're looking. Maybe you might even not look your best after all the refeed days. It might be that you're almost like spilled. It'll be interesting to know, and you might then tighten up a little bit and then you get your best look, but you'll probably notice it over the next days in terms of how you look and feel in the gym, and how pumps are, and contractions and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And it was another good reminder, and I would encourage listeners to do this as well, is always take progress pictures as well. And it doesn't mean don't necessarily take them every week expecting change, but at the same time, every couple of months after every mesocycle, it's good to have that data in your data banks, because one thing that we were finding hard to do is look back from the previous year, because I'd only taken maybe 4 lots of progress pictures and there wasn't a real like for like, and it's like so again, I'd really encourage people to just, hey, data is good. And in this case, sometimes, it's better to have more data than less data, for sure.
Yeah, I think every month or two in your kind of off season, brilliant to kind of get progress photos and just a check on the physique. It's something and when you're expecting faster changes in the physique, therefore you take them more regularly. So like on diet phases, you might take them every 2 weeks potentially to every month, and then in gaining phases every month to 2 months. And like I'm in this recovery phase, and I could probably take them every week and see changes. I'm not quite doing it that much, but I'm definitely still keeping an eye on the physique and how it's changing. And the good thing that I have with that, or one, I think some coaches do it because it's learned from enhanced coaches who maybe do see more frequent visible changes, and also the scale is less reliable. But I think part of it is also, it gets competitors in particular just kind of greasing the groove with their posing to some extent. Not that I think you have to do tons of posing in your off season, but maybe doing a bit now and then isn't a bad thing. And the other thing is accountability. Like, it just keeps they don't want to see themselves like looking bloated and a bit of a mess, so you can kind of keep some additional accountability through it. But
Definitely.
yeah, good advice. Don't get too complacent. You want to focus on your training in the off season, but don't, if you are a competitor in particular, don't take your eyes off what you're taking to stage, which is the look.
And I think there's a certain, it might help with a bit of emotional detachment as well. Like again, like if you're a little bit, if you've gone a little bit too overboard in the off season, it's like, oh, hey, okay, I'm not going to get too emotional about it, but I've gone a bit too far here, or vice versa. Again, like I think that slight, just looking at it from a bit more of a data perspective as well. I think sometimes, again, a good approach, because again, we can get a bit emotionally attached to what the weight is saying on the scale or what we're actually looking like. Whereas if we're just like, no, come on, we're just going to get the photos or get the number from the scale and we're just going to plug it in, and then again, take that approach forwards.
It's funny, every tool can be useful and not useful
Yeah.
if you don't have the right mindset and perspective surrounding it. So I definitely see what you're saying. So, Mike, I don't know if you got anything else for this week. Otherwise, we can get to some questions.
No, I mean, did you want to, because I was also noticed that on your stories that your weight had stabilized this week and you bumped your
True.
calories up a little bit.
Yes, actually, that's a good idea. I was thinking nothing changed for me this week, so I was going to kind of give an update. But no, it did. So it's really interesting. Really interesting. I find this interesting that it appears, I think, my lower end, like, settling range, or what's it called, the lower intervention point of like body fat / body weight, where my body is like, yeah, we're happy here, I think is the high 170s. So I've been landing around 177, 178 and hovering there for like 2-ish weeks now, maybe even going actually three sore weeks. This week I bumped my calories, but actually my weights continue to pretty much maintain. I didn't bump them by much, and I'm being very conservative with those bumps because I just think that makes sense for where I'm at, and like my level of advancement, the amount of muscle I'm going to grow. I don't need a big surplus. So, and training's going well, and I feel good. So, yeah. Anyway, I got to this point, and the thing that was very clear to me that I'd kind of reached it was one, that actual just like weight maintaining, like not moving food and then weight just maintained. So I think that's kind of like a bit of a clue for people, where I think it's almost like, this makes complete sense, right? That lower end intervention point is almost like a magnet, and it's pulling you towards it. It's like you can try and stay under it for a while, but you have to really try. And so I was saying previous weeks, my weight was just going up, and it was like it doesn't really make sense, like versus my output and my intake. I'm not really eating more, but it was just like my body just wanted to be there. And I've seen that with clients too, where it's like they've just kind of increased weight maybe quicker than we'd expect, and then it levels off quite a lot. And I think it's just the body wants to get to it where it's comfortable. And if you try and be under it, it's just tough, and you're going to experience diet fatigue symptoms. So I haven't changed anything. I didn't change anything, and I just let my weight kind of creep up. And yeah, now I've hit this body weight. Lots of the symptoms were starting to level out, but the really key one that's happened, 2 of them, is hunger and appetite. So my hunger is way more manageable. I'm not clock watching as much. I'm finding I can go for stretches without food, and it's not a problem. I might even I can go out. Actually, what did I do? So this Sunday I went to my best mate, Cameron's, and I basically just took a bit of food with me, but I didn't really take that much. And we went to Tesco, and I bought some bits and pieces. But anyway, I basically hadn't eaten that much, and I was on my way home to Charlotte. And I was like, hey, do you want to get a takeaway? Because I have actually, and it can be whatever you kind of want, because I have a good amount of room here. Whereas normally I'd be like, I can't really be that flexible. We still hadn't really been eating out that much or having really many takeaways at all. And that's like very normal in my off season. We'll have a meal out a week, maybe a takeaway a week. And it's easy for me to modify my day and my week to be able to get that in. And so, yeah, it was like, let's get some burger and chips. We did that. And it was like, that was really comfortable and easy, actually. And so, yeah, it's been nice to have that. It feels like a bit of a relief, like I can breathe again. And stress definitely will come down due to that. So, yeah, it's been nice. I had brought my calories down, they'd kind of gone up, and then I brought them down a bit, and now I'm creeping them back up. So now I'm on I'm closing in on 3,300 calories a day, which is totally reasonable given I'm at 178, 177 pounds, 10 to 12k steps on average for the week. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased. I'm feeling that's good. The only thing that isn't quite there is my libido isn't like where it gets to in an off season. But that's all. For most people, it's the last thing to come, and by no means it's not terrible. It's just I know it can be slightly better. But even that, I've noticed, I've noticed a slight change where I don't know. It's like when you diet and where you wouldn't notice, I don't know, an advert for food, you now notice it. Or you smell something along the street and you now notice it. It's similar to, like, I don't know, I walk down the street and my head will just turn if there's like, I don't know, some good looking female walking on the road where I'm like, oh, that's different. I hadn't been doing that.
It's like a little kind of like meta voice in your head going like, oh, Steve, you're like, oh, I'm doing that more kind of thing.
It's the monkey brain just being like, hey, you were put on this earth to reproduce, and now it's like, now you can because you're at a healthy, my body is deeming me, myself in a healthier place where I have some sort of libido again.
It's so interesting. Yeah, like you said, like it's really like good to know, like, hey, around this 177 pounds mark, this is your lower intervention point. And it'd be really, I was thinking before you mentioned that, whether once you get to that 180, whether that like the remaining bits of your libido just all come back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. But now, nicely, that I'm not at 180, 3 pounds under it, or 2 to 3, it sounds like nothing. But for a bodybuilder in their off season, that's potentially months of additional gaining. So it kind of excites me. I think a lot of people kind of throw that away and they'll just, I mean, for some people, as we said before, some people it's worth just throwing it away and getting recovered and they don't have the patience, but also it just doesn't make sense for them. It's too stressful. Whereas for me, that kind of being that diligent, and it was the same for you, kind of going real slow, creeping it up. I remember your like first mesocycle out of prep. How many weeks did you end up going for?
It was ridiculous. It was something like 13 or 14 or something like that.
It won't surprise me if mine's similar, but I think I'm definitely knocking on the door of it. I'm riding that cusp. I feel better this week, but last week I was definitely riding a bit of sickness, and I was like, if I don't nail my sleep, if I don't nail every variable, something's going to throw me, and I'm going to have to take some days off. But at the moment, coming through, what is it, week 11 now, and still performing, and everything's taken basically, I'm going to say 1 to failure, or even potentially past failure on some things, on like some final sets of like chest press. I'm just like go until I literally can't move, just see what happens. But I'm not adding set volume at this point because that's at a point where I'm just like, I don't think it's wise to add it. I'd be worried that it would push me over the edge.
But in a way, kind of, would you think that this is kind of natural because, your body is like a sponge post-competition, and so you've got this increased food, and so you can utilize that toward, your body can just utilize that increased energy towards just pushing its recovery capacity, or not, in some senses, its capacity has just been increased.
Yeah, if I put it in I think MRV makes sense to term it that. It's like your MRV was like at the end of prep, it's down here, and then every week it's like almost just linearly going up. So yeah, I think though now I'm at this point, I'm going to hit that fatigue wall soon because I'm not getting that exponential recovery anymore. It's just like, oh, now you're actually just recovered. So now I'm a bit more like a normal off-season human. So I imagine I'll have similar to you, Mike, where mesocycles end up being like 8 weeks long or something like that before that fatigue just hits you and you're just like, yep, gotta take a bit of a break before I push on.
Definitely. And I think the good thing is like if and when it happens, you'll just be like, oh, okay, I know it's gonna come sometime, no big deal, we'll just deload now. And it's like, right, we're just gonna milk it for just when it happens, and then when it happens it's like, oh, okay, no worries.
I'm really enjoying training. So accepting having to back off is going to be, it feels like it would be hard, but at the same time, I know I've been really enjoying my rest days. So thinking about, actually having like half a week off the gym sounds relatively appealing right now. So I think it will be that.
Yeah, and I think we forget sometimes, like this, sometimes so many good things can come from a deload in terms of like bit of extra time, like it's an extra maybe 2 hours or an hour or 2 hours in your day, that you can do to other things. And yeah, just enjoying that time and that recovery is just really nice. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like, hey, 3-4 days, maybe a bit longer potentially, but yeah, and it's not that long in the grand scheme of things.
No, and whenever you go through it, the sense of recovery and like freshness you get post, and how good the training sessions start to feel again, and you don't kind of have any of that anxiety and dread within workouts. It's like, oh yeah, this is why I back off now and then, because I need a refresher. But yeah, that's the update on me.
Love it.
Question time? Ready?
Yeah, let's go to questions.
Okay. So I need to open them up. Let's find them. So the way I did it this week, guys, is I put a question box on my story, and I'm prioritizing the ones that have come from the hyperbolic time chamber, because they have left a signature of an ant. And that's because I change it each time so that the people in the chamber know they're going to get their questions prioritized. Because if I left it as like what did I do last time? It was an olive. If I left it as an olive every time, then people would know, oh, I just have to sign off with an olive. I don't have to be in the time chamber. But you do have to be in the time chamber, because I'll change what you sign off with.
So
there's quite a lot of
hyperbolic time chamber.
Yes. So the first one comes from Gallimard, and they have asked, with big day-to-day weight fluctuation, how to know when to adjust anything on a bulk? You go for it, Mike.
So I think the key thing there is sometimes not going by day-to-day fluctuations, and actually what is the average from the week and from the month, because day-to-day fluctuations can occur for many, many different reasons. And hopefully, if there were wild day-to-day fluctuations, again, maybe it might be, you might be able to look back and think, maybe something odd happened with the meal that I was eating or whatever. But again, it all comes back to the long-term trends. Like, what is your weight doing week to week? What is your weight doing month to month? And I think going by that rather than actually the day-to-day.
Yeah, I don't think I could have said it much better. There is nothing to do with weight, like fluctuations day to day. So our recommendation at Revive Stronger is, and what we do with our clients, is daily weigh-ins at similar time under similar conditions, and then take a weekly average. Minimum of 4 weigh-ins across the week. Take a weekly average, compare that week average to the week before. That gives you an idea of a trend. And I would say in a mass gaining phase, because we are trying to gain or change weight at a slower pace, it's good looking at a longer term trend line too. So don't look at 1 week, look at 2, look at 3, look at a month. How's my weight look like it's changing? And then this is something I recommend too, is if you've got a weigh-in after a day of just completely different, that's like, I don't know, you've weighed in way earlier, way later, or you've had a meal out that you normally wouldn't. I know for me, whenever I have like a Wagamama chicken ramen, for example, it has so much sodium that I have a high sodium diet, but it just has that much more. So I know my weigh-in the next day is always higher, and I'm just like, it's bad data. So you could almost remove those weigh-ins if you wanted to. But fluctuations are bound to happen, so you take them into consideration. So yeah, I think there's not much more that needs to be said on that.
No.
Next question is actually just, I'll probably go back to this one on my story, is where is my playlist available? Because I have a hypertrophy anime hypertrophy, something like that playlist on Spotify. So I'll share that at some point. But if you search it, you'll probably find hypertrophic anime, and my name will pop up somewhere on Spotify. What do do you listen to music at the moment, Mike?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixture, really. It kind of depends on what I'm feeling. It's kind of like electronic dubstep. So it probably is similar to your hypertrophy anime. It's just something with a bit of just a beat and a rhythm, and I can't explain it, but it just gets me going, and it just gets me in a bit of a zone and a flow, and then I just go with it.
Have you listened to funk music? PHONK.
I might have done. I can't remember a specific song though.
Maybe search it and see if you like it. I don't know if it's similar to like what you just mentioned in that genre. And then you'll like, if you haven't checked out my playlist, you'll probably like it.
I think you've already shared it with me. I've got it saved on my Spotify.
Okay, you didn't like it enough then. Actually, I haven't been using that. Spotify now has AI and has an AI DJ. and I quite often just let him pick my tunes for my
Oh,
work for my
amazing.
workout. Yeah, he's like, "Hi, Steve. Like, we're gonna listen to some of you listened back in 2018. This banger," and I'm like, "Oh, great! Like, that's awesome." So I've been enjoying that. So next one is keeping up with John, and he has asked, "Would you recommend weighted vest during prep for cutting?"
I've never personally used it. I would only probably go anecdotally off of your experiences, and I'd probably say it's not worth it because I think we can get exactly the same results. And I think probably whilst initially it might feel fine, I think if you go deep, the deeper you go into a cut, I think it becomes more of a burden, just like having high step count becomes a burden. So you might feel like, oh, I can totally do 16,000 steps, 20,000 steps. Yeah, sure you can. But, weeks and months down the line, it becomes a real burden and you're really wishing you'd kept your steps lower. So I think these things seem great and they are okay initially, but the reality is I don't think they're very sustainable. And so I probably wouldn't recommend them.
Yeah, I have used it and I've not used it, and I would say I preferred not using it than using it. I do think there are some contexts it could be really handy potentially as a tool, but I think trying to almost biohack your physiology by saying, hey, I'm weighting my bones down and they have, I think it's their osteocytes, then sense that there's weight and load on them, and that can play a role on like the gravitostat, and my hunger in levels aren't going to be as high because my body thinks it's got the same weight as it always had, and maybe I get better maintenance of muscle. I haven't seen the benefit of that, and in fact, like we said, for every gimme there's a gotcha. When you have high step counts, there's fatigue cost involved. Even though it's low, once you start getting much above like 15 for most people, there's almost this exponential fatigue that starts kicking in, and burden and stress. And same with the weighted vest. Like, it just starts to become a real burden. And especially as you start, like, the way I used it was replacing the weight I lost. And once I got to like 10 kilos, people go above that. Some people lose 20 kilos and they're wearing a 20 kilo weighted vest for the majority of the day. And it's just like, man, that is hard. And psychologically wearing to like have to wake up and put it on as well. So I think, like everything, there's like this U-shaped inverted U where it's like, yeah, it could benefit you and it's going to look different for everyone, but there's a point of which you have to accept it's going to be taking away and make things harder. And really, I just view it as an energy expenditure tool. So it just helps you expend more energy. So one application I can think of it being valuable is, say you only have a certain amount of time to do your steps. So you can't increase steps, but maybe you're only getting 8,000. And so you have no more time to do more. Why not whack on a weighted vest of 5 kilos when you do your steps? And now it just makes that 8,000 more like 12,000 maybe. So I do think there's some potential context that it could be beneficial, especially for maybe a smaller male or female who are quite sedentary, where it just is just like, hey, you can just burn a little bit more via your daily activities via wearing it. But yeah, you definitely have to be aware that it can become a burden, and there's no free lunch in comp prep. You can try and make it as easy as possible, but even the people that are doing everything in their power to make it as easy as possible, it's freaking hard to get stage lean. So yeah, it's kind of one of those.
I think that I love that little utility and exception there. I think that's really helpful. And it made me think as well about how, again, there are no true hacks as such. It's like you can't cheat the system because it might look like that in the short term, but eventually it will catch up with you again. So yeah, and it makes me just think of, hey, you're probably, you're better off just allowing a little bit more time, but if it's more sustainable, more enjoyable and manageable, but just takes a little bit longer, hey, it's probably the better option potentially.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, again, where similar to energy flux, you probably heard of the concept of essentially saying, hey, if you can eat more, but be in the same deficit as someone eating less, but move more, therefore, you ultimately tend to see better results that way. But then people take it to an extreme, and it's like, you can't take these things to extremes. It's like, yeah, if it's comfortable to bump your steps by 10% and it's not a burden, it's probably a big win. Similar to like maybe wearing a weighted vest, 5 kilos for a couple of your walks, and it's really convenient and easy. It's like a no-brainer. Maybe that's a nice win, but it's not game-changing. And there's people who have done things on paper which should look very suboptimal, and they still get to stage in incredible shape. So I do think for people like us, Mike, who are average to above average genetics, let's say, and who want to battle with people who are elite, we need everything in our favor. So I kind of get like why we think about these things so deeply, and a lot of our audience will. Anyway, that's a different subject.
We could go down. That could be a rabbit hole. Yes. Another question.
There's quite a lot of questions actually, unless I'll run out, but there's quite a few. So this one is lifting progress 9. How do you go about a gaining phase to minimize fat gain? Oh, I have an immediate thought on that.
Yeah.
Can I just say my immediate thought?
Please do.
My immediate thought is, I just think it's fundamentally a flawed idea to go into a gaining phase with the idea of minimizing fat. It's like, it's such a, I guess, a negative mindset to go into it with. I kind of view it as like, how can we maximize muscle gain? Like, that's my initial, like, I like to flip it on its head, because I used to have this too, where I'm like, minimize fat gain at all costs during a gaining phase. And it's like, when you go into a gaining phase like that, you're almost setting yourself up for failure. But anyway, regardless, how do you go about minimizing fat gain, Mike?
No, you hit the nail on. That was the immediate thought that came into my head. And again, I think the biggest thing is, so yeah, I guess my immediate answer is trying not to lose my head in sort of social situations. And what I mean by that is where, you know, you might be in the scenario where you go out for a meal and you kind of, you know, you lose track of, you know, what you're eating, and you just, you know, for want of a better word, maybe you just kind of pig out sort of thing, and you go way over your calories, and, you know, it turns into a bit of a free-for-all. And I think if you can try to minimize those sorts of episodes, then you're probably going to, you know, not shorten your massing phase, essentially. So I think if someone can just limit that, and again, you know, this is all about a lifestyle, so it's not about not going out, it's not about not being social, but it's about when you are being social and when you are eating other foods, that you are continuing to be mindful, you're continuing to have your finger on the pulse in terms of, right, I think I'm in this calorie ballpark, and this is the calorie ballpark that I need to be in for where I'm at. And I think if you can always keep that semblance of mindfulness and moderation and prevent those spikes in body weight escalation, then I think that goes a long way, really. But ultimately, like you said, it does come back to, hey, we have to be in a surplus to help maximize muscle growth. And with that, there is an inevitability of muscle gain.
Bulking is dead, Mike. That is the current vogue.
Is it?
You probably didn't know that. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It's like a theme at the moment, which is interesting. But yeah, in regards to what you said there, it makes me think of what happens from a lot of my clients who don't see... Actually, it actually is nice, because this is going to sound really good for the coaching, but quite often they complain that their bulking phases haven't been as good as they are when they come work with me. And it's because there's that level of accountability, and they don't get complacent during their gaining phases. What I tend to find happens, and what you talked about there in terms of eating out and like pigging out essentially, and not being on top of things, it's this degree of complacency. Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, I don't know if this is just how humans are driven, but cutting phases for a lot of people become quite easy because it's very black and white. It's like easy. Eating less for a short period of time, I can do it. But eating just a little bit more for a really long time is kind of tough. It's much easier to pig out and then have to cut sooner, like for a short time, right? Because then it's just a free-for-all. But I think a lot of people go into gaining phases and they think they shouldn't be hungry. They think they should be kind of stuffed. They think they deserve a X amount of calories, or to eat X foods and processed foods and not have an and still be stuffed. It's like, it's so varied. And it ultimately comes down to keeping an eye on your scale weight and letting that inch up over time. And it comes back to that, like, not freaking out over fluctuations, but also don't freak out if it's maintenance for 2 weeks. It's not a problem. If you set a surplus and you've been gaining for a while at it, the body doesn't adapt up very quickly. Only until you hit that upper intervention point again, probably, which I really butt heads with. do you start, like, the body starts getting upset, and then maybe it's not even worth pushing through. But once you get into like that sweet spot of body fat, body weight, where you're between those intervention points, you set a kind of small surplus, you just will keep gaining for ages. You won't have to modify it very often, and just be diligent to it. And yeah, don't think you deserve a certain amount of food, or not to ever be hungry, or to be able to change your diet completely from where it was cutting. It's just more. And yeah, you can, the 80-20 rule, I think, again, at Revive Stronger, that's what we kind of apply. 80% of your food from wholesome, minimally processed foods, 20% of what have you. But if you start knocking that to 50-50, like, no wonder you're hungry. And something I've noticed, Mike, on a side note, that kind of lines up with this, is it gets 50-50, and then there's processed foods that come in. And as an example of that, I've been having, at Christmas, I got quite a lot of protein bars. So I've been including a protein bar where I feel good to each day after my workout. I have like my cream of rice with my oats and my protein, and I have a kiwi and an apple, and then I have like a protein bar. So I've been trying these different ones. But what I noticed is I weigh them out now. And I know that sounds a bit obsessive, but the one I had today was literally 10 grams heavier than the weight it was meant to be. So I was like, I'm actually getting a whole lot more of this bar than I thought. Most of the time, these protein bars are heavier than not. So I just think that could apply to a lot of things. I don't think you need to weigh out everything, but if you do have a heavily like packaged processed food diet, you can't just scan it all in, and it's like they have like 62 grams E, and that E stands for estimated weight. So for some of these kind of more packaged foods, you probably do want to like weigh them out maybe now and then and get a gauge on it. And if you're eyeballing a lot, that can also, it's a similar problem. It's a lack of accuracy. So I do think there needs to be some, just don't get complacent with these things.
What kind of what made you want to think like, oh, hey, I'm going to weigh this?
It was because my weight was continuing to climb quite quickly, and I was like, what have I changed? Oh, I've included one of these bars. I wonder if it's like, if there's anything there to it. So I think that's what made me do it. And then I did it with a bunch of different brands and bars. I'm like, oh damn, like quite often there's like a 10% like increase in the amount of what the bar, and it's almost heavier. And I'm like, you got to account for it if you're going to have it. So account for it. So now I've just started weighing them. When I'm deeper into an off season, like I'm more liberal with those sort of things. But at the moment, and even deeper into an off season, if you are really trying to gain very, very slowly, some of these things, they can catch you if they add up a lot. Say you don't weigh your fruit and veg, and you have a lot of packaged foods, and then you eat out once or 2-3 times a week. Suddenly, lots of things are guesstimated, and if you're 10% off every time, and off by being under, you're suddenly in a much larger surplus than you intended to be.
Yeah.
The scale doesn't lie, though. The scale will tell you.
Exactly. And I kind of wanted to finish there with like just saying like, again, it's that middle ground though. It's about not being so strict with yourself in the off season that you're almost in diet mode. It's like, no, it's not about being that strict with yourself, but equally it's not about being so lax that you're letting complacency slip in. It's like there's that middle ground. And like you said there, like, right, use the scale weight. If your scale weight is a little bit all over the place, then right, okay, we probably definitely need to, that might be a signal that we need to rein things in a little bit, and then get back to that middle ground.
Exactly what you said there. I'm not trying to perpetuate like a hyper prep mindset during an off season, but it's just tying it up when you see that complacency kick in. So something I do, like I said, I eat out regularly in an off season. I don't like overestimating meals out because they're already so high in calories, and I know that. So what I tend to do is I'm like, normally when I eat out, my steps are way higher because I'm moving about, and I'm like, well, that kind of buffers this a potential underestimation in food. And similarly, if you are like very precise with your food and suddenly your steps go up like really high for a while, you'll feel that and see it eventually on your scale weight too. So yeah, anyway, kind of comes back to the same point. Next question.
Yes, let's go.
So this is from Mandy Lay Beauty. She has asked, optimal carb intake for building from someone who prefers fat. Oh, sorry, yeah. Optimal carb intake for someone who prefers fat. Does it matter in a surplus?
I don't think it matters in a surplus. I think because if you're in a surplus, I would have thought you theoretically should have an abundance of fuel and energy in your system. Um, and I
So you'd say
don't
keto is as effective to go to an
know,
extreme.
not to an extreme, but I'm just thinking of if someone's having kind of a fairly balanced mix of, say, protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Um, I don't think necessarily people need to worry about, going to an extreme too far one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's the key is avoid extremes. I don't think keto will be as effective as
No.
like having carbohydrates in your diet, but so long as you're eating like generally a well-rounded diet, is there going to be much difference between like having, and I guess to some extent it might depend on the person, but I guess that scales then. I was thinking if someone's very active, then they might require more carbs to feel
Mm,
fueled for workouts, but then their energy intake's going to scale. And even if they have a slightly higher bias towards fats, they're still scaling up their carbohydrates. And fats will be carbohydrate sparing at other times. So I do think you're kind of basing it off, like, there was this theoretical argument, and we've gone for it before, where fat is more likely stored as fat, whereas carbohydrates aren't as readily stored as fat. So it's like maybe we go high carb. Also with carbohydrates, they stimulate insulin. Insulin is inherently anabolic because it's anti-catabolic. So maybe there's something there. This kind of high carb hypothesis, which I think is, I kind of learned that from Broderick Chavez and Mike Israetel to some extent. I'm not sure they both stand by that still, that they think that's superior. And I think you could make some mechanistic theoretical arguments, like I just mentioned some of them there. But ultimately, I think what she spoke about here in terms of her preference is so key. Like if cutting her fats back and to theoretically go for higher carbs, and that leads to her not enjoying the diet, and like that's already I think a bigger loss than any theoretical gains we're getting from having higher carbs.
yes.
Would you agree with that?
No, totally. I think you hit the nail on the head there. And again, I guess it's like excluding the extremes, not going to the extremes, right? There should be, with sort of taking into account the increase in calories and fairly mixed. It's like go with your preference, because you should have enough of both so that it's not, having a detrimental effect.
And the only other thing I'd say to that is it somewhat is goal dependent. Like some people might notice it, other people might not. But you can just kind of self experiment. Like try where your preference lands you, see how your workouts are. If your workouts are great and you're seeing great results, then awesome. Maybe just go with that. Or if you're unsure, half your fat intake, bump your carbs up, and then see how your performance is there. And if it's like much of a muchness, hey, you got your answer.
Yeah.
Especially in a gaining phase, right? From being in a surplus. That's kind of the context of this.
I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Nice. Right. Next question is from underscore Will underscore Imma underscore Knock underscore Kine ... There's probably even more to this name. What's your stance on the whole stability for hypertrophy craze? I didn't know it was a craze.
Yeah, neither did I. My thought process is that, well, stability is important in order to generate force production. So stability for me is pretty essential, I would say, for the majority of exercises, because it might be a bit of an extreme example, but again, the classic, bench press on a Bosu ball or a gym ball or something. It's like, well, we're probably not generating, the maximum or optimal amount of, growth stimulus because we're having to work so hard to just stabilize ourselves. Whereas if things are, as stable as we can make them, then we can just put the whole focus on the target muscle. I didn't realize it was a craze, but for me, it just seems quite logical for the goal of muscle growth or strength.
I think it's probably similar to, obviously, taking muscles to a stretch position is in vogue, and it's probably similar there where it makes sense to do that, but you can take it to such an extreme where it starts to not make sense.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people have debated. You've probably seen Mike Israetel doing his curls where he's on like a flat bench, or even now I think he's doing it declined. So he's getting this kind of, it's like, you know, like incline curls, and then he's like flat, and then he's now on a decline. So it's like trying to get that bicep as stretched as possible. And clearly, Mike is an incredibly intelligent guy, and it's working for him, and he feels like it's a great movement. I tried it on a like slight incline, and I immediately felt it in my shoulders. I felt very unstable. It didn't work for me. I think I have some clients who like it. I think some of them are running it at the moment, not many. And some people have really argued against it because they're like, the stability concerns, it puts a lot of pressure on the interior delt because of the stretch and everything. So it's like, that could be an example of where, for some people, that could be taking it too far, or you're trying to like, I don't know, some people might say like the iliac pull around variant where you're like coming around your rib cage and then like over the top of your head. It's like, if that starts to take away from other elements or creates that could create instability, for example, and it could take away from results to some extent, then it starts to become a problem. So here with stability, I think some people are taking it to an extreme. And it's like dumbbell pressing is unstable and therefore it's a bad exercise. It's like, dude, do you know how many bodybuilders got absolutely wham off dumbbell pressing and how it's a staple for so many? Like you ask 100 IFBB pro bodybuilders at the top level, and I imagine lots of them would say dumbbell pressing is like bread and butter for them. I think it's that element of like, or like, oh no, you can't, I don't know, do a bench press, barbell bench press, because your chest limits the range of motion, so you can't come as deep and get the best stretch possible. So it's like that extreme. But if you don't include the extreme and you just talk about stability, it's so important for exercises, because again, you take it to the other extreme of unstable, well, that's really, really a bad idea. And I just think, look at your general hypertrophy style movements, and some might be more stable, some might be less stable, and some will have, I don't know, more length versus less length. And they have like winning, and they win on some elements and lose on other elements. And it's like, they're just tools in your toolkit, and you kind of play around with them. So yeah, I guess that's where my thoughts are on it. I think, like for me, for example, I have a reel that's going to come up, actually. I'm going to post it. It's like a one-arm cable row. And I put my free arm on my knee to stabilize my shoulders and like my pelvis. My shoulders basically. And then I put my legs down pressed on a Reebok stand, because then that stabilizes my pelvis. If I didn't do that, I'd just like be pulled with this thing, and it wouldn't be a productive exercise anymore. I wouldn't really be able to generate tension through my lats. So by having those having that extra stability is super helpful. Like lat pull down, pressing your knees into the pad. If you didn't have a pad at all, I wouldn't be able to do lat pull downs. I'd just be pulled up. Yeah. So stability is vital. It's just, don't get carried away and say dumbbell pressing is no good.
It comes back to avoiding extremes, because if you go to the extreme of in either direction, it's like, hey, it's probably not going to be working really here. And the other fact of that is the individualization component as well. It's like, hey, do you know what? Taking, that with that decline bicep exercise, it's like, yeah, sure, that might feel good for some people, might feel great for the odd person, but it might not feel good for a lot of people. So there's that self-experimentation again, n=1 thing that everyone always has to do for themselves.
Right, we have 7 minutes, Mike, less than that. 2 questions, so these are going to be quick fire a little bit. So this one's from Jamie Rich Smith, and he has asked, shoulder press, weekly increments are so tiny, how do people reach body weight? I think that means, like, say you weigh 70 kilos, how do people shoulder press their body weight at some point? Because the increments are so tiny. I actually don't understand the question.
No, me neither, but they would get there eventually, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's just progressively overloading. You get stronger.
Prioritizing
eventually.
The exercise as well. Like if they put it ahead of other exercise, they specialize in that exercise, maybe.
Yeah. For a 1 rep max, it depends if you're doing like a standing overhead press. Like it's strong, but I think it's reasonable after like a good number of years of lifting.
Yeah, no, definitely. Although I would say, last question. Sorry, I was just going off on one.
Right, so this is from Nikias. So you know Nikias.
That's
And he has asked, starving on maintenance/surplus, but not in a deficit, why/how to fix any client experience. So this is good because this kind of comes back to a little bit of that question before where it's like to minimize fat gain during a gaining phase.
Can you just reread the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so basically someone not in a deficit,
Mm-hmm.
but they are hungry/starving.
Yeah, so I think there again, it's again coming back to the scale weight. It's coming back to the client context in terms of where they're at, and really trying to use that feedback to, and not being a slave to the hunger signals, because again, that hunger can be driven by like numerous things, you know, situation, hormones, whatever you want to, you know, multiple things. And I think it's about knowing like, hey, we are not in a deficit right now, and you know, the hunger that you're feeling is something else that we've just got to try and manage as best that we can, and then kind of going from there, knowing that it might pass, but we shouldn't just increase food or change things just because you're feeling hungry.
Yeah.
That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, when I think about why it's happening, it comes back to what you said there in terms of like hunger can be physiological, but it can be psychological, it can be environmental. Like there's so many things that can lead you to like, you can be, one of the things that often leads to people being hungry is being bored. It's just to fill time. So I think trying to differentiate, is it cravings or like you're just bored, or is it true physiological hunger? Like, hey, I would eat, so lettuce, I'm that hungry. Like, is it actually that, or is it that? Then I have to assume this person's at a like healthy level of body fat, like they're not stage lean and they're not trying to maintain too lean of a point for them. And that could be individual. We talked about lower intervention points. I'm someone who feels pretty good, like pretty lean. Like that's just, and I feel terrible when I get like to a point where a lot of people would be like, you're still really lean. Other people, like for you, Mike, you feel pretty good lean, but you also don't have a wall of a ceiling of a higher intervention point. Yeah. And then there's other individuals that I've worked with who they need to get like close to 20% over like a stage weight to start feeling normal. Whereas that's like my upper end. Like that's where I start feeling like over the top. So everyone's a little bit different in terms of that range of where they are. And I do think people might be able to navigate it lower, but that more so comes down to like habits, stuff like this, and like habits in terms of food choices, but also like keeping expenditure up, that sort of thing. So that might be one reason why. And I'd also, like you said, hunger isn't necessarily a problem. I'd look at, like with me, I'm assessing diet fatigue as a whole, and we get post-show, we were doing this with you, Mike, where we're rating out of 5, like, okay, we've got hunger and food focus. But outside of that, how are your energy levels? Are they really good? How's your sleep? Is that in a really good place? How's your libido? Like, are other markers in a positive place that kind of determines you're healthy, but your hunger's just high? And if you can say those other things are in a good place, then I would be less concerned. If they weren't in a good place, then I would be like, we certainly don't want to be in a surplus we don't want to go into a deficit right now. And we have to look at where someone's body fat is and be like, does it make sense to push body weight up a bit higher if they're still quite lean, maybe to kind of get those recovered? Potentially, even if it's been a while, get some blood work done to just make sure things are in a decent place. And then it comes down to like food choices too. Like someone can't complain about being hungry if their diet looks like I don't know of an example of like, I don't know, an average Westerner's diet, for example. If it's just full of like, essentially like quote unquote junk. If it's mostly wholesome, minimally processed foods, then okay, then it's more of a question of, okay, like you shouldn't be feeling hungry too much in that scenario. So yeah, I would be less concerned if it's just hunger they're feeling, but I definitely assess where's that hunger coming from, assessing body fat levels, potentially looking into blood work. And then my only final thought on this one, Mike, is, for example, with Crystal, Dr. Crystal, she came on the podcast and she was essentially experiencing comp prep-like symptoms at very healthy, even potentially slightly overweight position. And this is where genetics come in and how some people are just, I don't think anyone's ever called it this, and I don't know if it's a politically correct way to say it, like a fat gene. Like you can have a skinny gene, a fat gene, or whatever. Like some people just have upregulated levels of ghrelin and downregulated levels of leptin. Maybe they become leptin insensitive. I don't know the specifics of it, but there's a reason this people have become obese outside of just the obesogenic environment. So that could be something to consider. I have had clients who have struggled with their weight for years, and we've really, really tried to get it under control and done everything in our power, and there's been nothing that solved it for them. And then I know that some of them have left and been prescribed Ozempic, and that could be the solution to their struggles. But I certainly wouldn't go there first. I'd look at all the lifestyle stuff first, blood work, get all that due diligence done, and then think about it.
Yeah. I really liked how you answered that question, because it's like it could be very easy just to be drawn into this one thing, which is hunger. But what I think you highlighted so well is that, right, there are multiple other markers that you can use to gauge, like, you know, are things in the right place, or are we on the right track? And I think that's the key thing. It's like, right, okay, we've got this challenge that we're facing. Let's zoom out a little bit and let's look at all these other different factors. Like you said, blood work, like you said, the context in terms of body fat, the scale, and all of these other things. And I think that if someone, you know, either who's coaching themselves or a coach, if they can do that, then I think that will really help to solve the issue, or at the very least, you've addressed all of the big rocks that need to be addressed first before you go on to anything else. So yeah, very good.
It makes me think of, thank you, Mike. It makes me think of like people getting prescribed TRT because they have low test. And it's like, but if you done all the things that would lead to healthy levels of testosterone, like you're at a healthy level of body fat, you have a healthy diet, you're eating at maintenance, you have really good sleep, you're not super stressed. Because a lot of people will just go to a clinic and get prescribed it. It's like, man, you didn't need to have done that. You could have, like, people are very quick to medicate issues when there are things that you can do beforehand. And in some situations, medication is the answer. But certainly don't jump to that conclusion, at least, I think.
It's like, to use kind of more of an analogy from the physio world, it's like sometimes people can be very quick to jump to surgery. They're like, oh, I need this surgery. And it's like, hang on, we haven't even tried rehab yet. Let's just give it, 6 weeks or, a few months of just really trying to get this knee strong or whatever before we go to surgery. But yeah, again, it's very easy for people to overlook sometimes.
Yes, they want a quick fix, unfortunately. Mike, that's all the questions, and
Wow.
we're over time now. So this has been great. Hopefully people have appreciated us answering the questions. And again, if you have questions, then head over to Instagram and maybe follow Mike at Mike_ReviveStronger, and he may even put up a question box. We might be able to send Mike some questions if you want them. But definitely get into the hyperbolic time chamber over at my Instagram at ReviveStronger. And I guess, and please comment below. All the love, support, subscribe, all that good stuff. We highly appreciate you. And hopefully this recording has gone successfully and people can see us and hear us. So guys, thank you very much. Cheers, Mike.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Steve.